The steam rose from the large pot like prayers ascending to heaven, carrying with it the rich aroma of vegetables and herbs that had been simmering since dawn. Marcus Chun stirred the soup with practiced movements, his weathered hands steady despite the exhaustion that had settled deep in his bones after another sleepless night of worry about bills and tomorrow's groceries. 80-year-old Lily stood on her wooden step stool beside him, carefully arranging crackers on paper plates with the serious concentration of someone given an important task. Her dark hair was pulled back in pigtails that bounced as she worked, and she hummed softly under her breath, a melody Marcus recognized from the lullaby her mother used to sing. Snow fell steadily outside their kitchen window, blanketing the modest neighborhood in white silence. Marcus glanced at the clock above their small dining table and felt his stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. In 30 minutes, people would begin gathering at their back door, drawn by word of mouth and desperate need to the warmth and nourishment he offered every Tuesday and Friday evening. The kitchen barely accommodated their own family meals, let alone the operation Marcus had been running for the past 2 years. Mismatched bowls covered every available counter space, and the old refrigerator hummed with the strain of storing ingredients he could barely afford. But when Mrs. Patterson from down the street had mentioned that her elderly neighbor hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, Marcus knew he couldn't turn away. That first night, he had served 7 people. Tonight, he expected at least 20. The sound of the front door opening drew his attention, and Marcus felt his shoulders tense as familiar footsteps approached. Mr. Whitmore, his 70-year-old neighbor, appeared in the kitchen doorway with his characteristic gentle smile and knowing eyes. "Good evening, Marcus," Mr. Whitmore said, removing his wool cap and shaking off the snow. "Smells wonderful in here, as always." Lily beamed at their visitor and waved enthusiastically. "Mr. Whitmore, I helped make the crackers pretty," she announced with pride, gesturing toward her carefully arranged plates. Marcus wiped his hands on his apron and nodded toward the elderly man who had become both friend and quiet supporter over the months. "The usual crowd tonight," he said, though he noticed the worry lines around Mr. Whitmore's eyes seemed deeper than usual. "Actually," Mr. Whitmore began, his voice dropping to a concerned whisper, "there might be a couple extra tonight. I heard from Janet at the grocery store that there are some siblings, who have been sleeping rough near the old warehouse district. Word is they've been asking around about food." The wooden spoon in Marcus's hand stilled as he absorbed this information. Children sleeping outside in this weather sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the winter air seeping through their old windows. He glanced at Lily, who was still humming and arranging crackers, blissfully unaware of the harsh realities that existed just blocks from their warm kitchen. "How old?" Marcus asked quietly. Mr. Whitmore shrugged, but his expression remained troubled. "The girl might be 12, maybe 13. The boy looks younger, perhaps 8 or 9. They've been spotted near the dumpsters behind Peterson's restaurant, but nobody's been able to approach them. They run whenever adults get too close." Marcus felt something twist in his chest, a familiar ache that always surfaced when he encountered stories of children in need. His social work background, though now just a memory from before the budget cuts eliminated his position, had exposed him to too many similar situations. Children who slipped through cracks in systems designed to protect them. Children who learned that survival meant staying invisible and trusting no one. The timer on the stove chimed, and Marcus turned his attention back to the soup, testing its temperature and seasoning with automatic precision while his mind raced with concern for 2 children he had never met but already felt compelled to help. "Daddy," Lily said, tugging at his sleeve, "the people are starting to come." Through the kitchen window, Marcus could see shadows moving in their backyard, figures emerging from the snowy darkness toward the warm light spilling from their home. He ladled soup into the first bowl, steam rising to fog his glasses briefly, and prepared to offer what little he had to whoever needed it most. The line of people stretched from Marcus's back door to the edge of his small yard, their breath forming ghostly clouds in the frigid air as they waited patiently for warmth and sustenance. Marcus moved efficiently between the kitchen and the door, ladling soup into bowls and offering gentle words to each person who approached. Mrs. Rodriguez, the single mother from 3 blocks over, accepted her bowl with grateful hands that trembled from cold and exhaustion. Her youngest daughter, barely 5 years old, peeked out from behind her mother's worn coat, eyes wide at the steam rising from the soup. "Thank you, Marcus," Mrs. Rodriguez whispered, her voice thick with emotion she tried to keep hidden from her child. "This means everything tonight." Marcus nodded and handed a small cup of soup to the little girl, watching as her face lit up with the first genuine smile he had seen from her. These moments reminded him why he continued this work despite the mounting pressure on his own resources and the growing concern about neighborhood complaints. As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself scanning the darkness beyond his yard, searching for any sign of the children Mr. Whitmore had mentioned. The snow continued to fall steadily, accumulating in drifts that would make sleeping outdoors not just uncomfortable but potentially deadly. It was nearly 9 o'clock when the last of the regular visitors had been served and thanked him before disappearing back into the night. Marcus began gathering the empty bowls when Lily tugged at his sleeve, her small face pressed against the kitchen window. "Daddy," she whispered urgently, "there are kids by the fence." Marcus followed her gaze and felt his heart constrict at the sight of 2 small figures huddled against his back fence, barely visible in the shadows cast by the streetlight. The children stood perfectly still, like deer caught between approaching and fleeing, their thin frames outlined against the white snow. Moving slowly to avoid startling them, Marcus stepped onto his back porch with 2 bowls of still warm soup. The cold air hit him immediately, but he ignored the chill and approached the fence with deliberate, non-threatening movements. The girl was indeed around 12, with tangled dark hair falling around her face and eyes that held far too much wariness for someone her age. She positioned herself protectively in front of the younger boy, who Marcus could see was shivering violently despite the oversized coat that hung from his thin shoulders like a tent. "I'm Marcus," he said softly, stopping several feet away from them. "I have soup if you're hungry." The girl's eyes darted between Marcus's face and the steaming bowls in his hands, her internal struggle visible as survival instincts warred with desperate need. The boy behind her swayed slightly on his feet, and Marcus realized with growing alarm that the child might be suffering from more than just cold and hunger. "My name is Elena," the girl finally said, her voice barely audible above the wind. "This is Tommy, my brother. We're not looking for trouble." "No trouble," Marcus assured her, setting the bowls on the ground and stepping back to give them space. "Just soup and a warm place to eat it, if you want." Elena studied him with eyes that had seen too much, evaluating threat levels and escape routes with the practiced assessment of someone who had learned that adults often meant danger. But Tommy's condition seemed to tip the balance, and she slowly reached for the bowls, never taking her eyes off Marcus. The first spoonful of soup brought a small sound of relief from Tommy, and Marcus watched as some tension left Elena's rigid posture. She ate quickly but carefully, making sure her brother got most of the larger pieces of vegetables and meat. "When did you last eat?" Marcus asked gently. Elena's jaw tightened. "Yesterday morning. Maybe the morning before. Time gets confused when you're moving." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. Children this young, surviving alone in winter conditions, spoke to failures in systems he had once been part of and still felt responsible for improving. "There's more soup inside," he offered, "and it's warm. You could sit at the kitchen table while you eat." The invitation hung in the air between them, loaded with implications and risks that Elena clearly understood. Trust meant vulnerability, and vulnerability had likely taught her painful lessons in her short life. Tommy swayed again, and Elena's arm immediately went around him to steady his small frame. In that gesture, Marcus saw everything he needed to know about their relationship and her fierce devotion to protecting her brother, even when she was barely more than a child herself. "Just until the storm passes," Marcus said quietly. "No questions, no obligations. Just warm soup and a safe place to rest." Elena looked down at Tommy, whose eyes were beginning to droop with exhaustion despite his efforts to stay alert. She touched his forehead with the back of her hand, and Marcus caught the flash of worry that crossed her features before she could hide it. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper carried on the wind. "But just until the storm passes." The warmth of Marcus's kitchen enveloped Elena and Tommy like a gentle embrace they had almost forgotten existed. Tommy sat at the small dining table, his thin hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate, while Lily chattered beside him about her favorite books and the drawings she had made that were stuck to the refrigerator with colorful magnets. Elena remained standing near the door, her eyes constantly scanning for exits and potential threats despite the obvious safety of their surroundings. Marcus noticed how she positioned herself to keep both Tommy and the door in her line of sight, a survival instinct that spoke to experiences no child should have endured. The sharp knock at the front door made Elena's entire body go rigid, her hand instinctively reaching for Tommy's shoulder. Marcus saw the fear flash across her face and held up a reassuring hand as he moved toward the sound. Patricia Grimsby stood on his front porch, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and her designer coat dusted with snow that she brushed off with irritated movements. Her thin lips were pressed into the disapproving line that Marcus had come to recognize as her default expression whenever she looked in his direction. "Mr. Chun," she said without preamble, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We need to discuss your illegal food distribution operation immediately." Marcus stepped onto the porch and pulled the door closed behind him, hoping to keep the conversation away from the children inside. "Mrs. Grimsby," he said carefully, "I'm just helping neighbors who need a meal." Her laugh was sharp and humorless. "Helping neighbors?" She gestured toward his house with a gloved hand. "You're running an unlicensed food service operation from a residential property. Do you have permits for this? Health department approval? Business licenses?" The questions hit Marcus like physical blows because he knew she was right about the legal requirements, even if she was wrong about his motivations. He had stretched every rule and bent every regulation in his desire to help people who were falling through the cracks of official systems. "I'm not making money from this," Marcus said quietly. "I'm just sharing food with people who are hungry." Mrs. Grimsby's eyes narrowed as she pulled out her phone and began taking pictures of his house, focusing on the area around the back door where evidence of the evening's food distribution might still be visible. "The legality isn't determined by your profit margin, Mr. Chun," she said while continuing to document what she clearly saw as violations. "You're operating a commercial kitchen without proper permits. You're creating traffic and disturbances in a residential neighborhood, and you're attracting exactly the kind of people we moved here to avoid." The last comment sent a chill through Marcus that had nothing to do with the winter air. He recognized the coded language that disguised prejudice as concern for property values and neighborhood character. "These are families," Marcus said, his voice gaining strength despite his growing anxiety about the legal implications of her threats. "They're people who work multiple jobs and still can't afford groceries, elderly residents on fixed incomes, single parents trying to feed their children." Mrs. Grimsby lowered her phone and fixed him with a stare that could have frozen the soup still warming on his stove. "I don't care about their sob stories, Mr. Chun. I care about maintaining the standards that make this a desirable place to live. Your little charity operation ends now, or I'll make sure the city shuts it down permanently." She turned and walked toward her car, her heels clicking sharply against the icy sidewalk. Before getting in, she called back over her shoulder without turning around. "You have until Friday to cease all food distribution activities. After that, I'll be calling the health department, code enforcement, and anyone else necessary to stop this nonsense. Don't test me on this." Marcus watched her drive away, her taillights disappearing into the snowy darkness like the red eyes of some predatory creature retreating to plan its next attack. The weight of her threat settled on his shoulders like a heavy blanket, pressing down with the knowledge that she had both the connections and the determination to follow through. When he returned to the kitchen, Elena was standing exactly where he had left her, but her posture had shifted into something even more defensive. She had clearly heard enough of the conversation to understand that their presence might be making Marcus's situation worse. "We should go," she said quietly, her hand already moving toward Tommy's shoulder to prepare him for departure. "No," Marcus said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "You're safe here tonight. Whatever problems I have with Mrs. Grimsby existed long before you arrived." But Elena's eyes held the wisdom of someone who had learned that accepting help often came with costs that others had to pay. She looked at Tommy, who was beginning to nod off in the warmth of the kitchen, then back at Marcus with an expression that held both gratitude and the painful knowledge that their presence might destroy the very sanctuary that had offered them salvation. The guest room had not been used since Marcus's sister visited 2 years ago, but he quickly made up the twin beds with clean sheets while Elena and Tommy waited quietly in the hallway. Tommy's exhaustion had finally overcome his weariness, and he leaned heavily against his sister, his eyes fighting to stay open despite the warmth and safety surrounding them. "You can sleep here tonight," Marcus said gently, stepping back to give them space to enter. "The bathroom is right across the hall, and there are extra blankets in the closet if you get cold." Elena surveyed the room with the same careful assessment she had given the kitchen, noting the window that could serve as an escape route and the door that led back to the main hallway. Her brother shuffled toward one of the beds and sat down heavily, his thin frame disappearing into the soft mattress. "Thank you," Elena whispered, her voice carrying layers of meaning that went far beyond gratitude for a place to sleep. Marcus nodded and began to leave them privacy, but Elena's voice stopped him at the doorway. Her words came out in a rush, as if she had been holding them back and could no longer contain the weight of their story. "We had a foster family," she said, staring at her hands. "The Hendersons. They were nice at first, but Mr. Henderson started drinking more after he lost his job. He never hurt us, but he would yell and throw things when he was drunk. Mrs. Henderson tried to protect us, but she was scared too." Marcus remained motionless, understanding that Elena needed to tell this story and that his role was simply to listen without judgment or interruption. "Tommy started having nightmares and wetting the bed," Elena continued. "Mr. Henderson said he was tired of dealing with damaged kids and that we were too much trouble. One night, Mrs. Henderson woke us up and told us to pack everything we could carry. She said she was sorry, but that Mr. Henderson was going to call social services in the morning to have us removed." The girl's voice remained steady, but Marcus could see her hands trembling as she spoke. Tommy had curled up on the bed and was listening with the hollow expression of someone reliving trauma. "We left that night," Elena said. "Mrs. Henderson gave us $40 and told us to find somewhere safe until we could get placed with a new family. But we had been in 4 homes before the Hendersons, and each one ended the same way. People think they want to help until they realize how much work we are." Marcus felt something break inside his chest as he watched these children carry burdens that would challenge adults. Elena's fierce protectiveness of Tommy made perfect sense now, as did their reluctance to trust the safety he offered. "How long have you been on your own?" he asked quietly. 3 weeks, Elena replied. "Maybe 4. We stayed in shelters when we could, but they asked too many questions and want to separate us. Tommy can't handle being away from me, and I promised our mother before she died that I would never let anyone split us up." The mention of their mother hung in the air like a prayer, and Marcus saw Tommy's small body curl tighter around himself as if trying to disappear entirely. Elena moved to sit beside her brother and began stroking his hair with gentle movements that spoke to years of providing comfort in the absence of any other caretaker. "Our mother was sick for a long time," Elena explained, her voice growing softer as Tommy's breathing began to even out. "She tried to keep us together as long as she could, but the medical bills and treatments used up everything we had. She made me promise to take care of Tommy no matter what happened to her." Marcus understood now why Elena had stood guard at his fence, why she evaluated every adult with suspicion, and why accepting help felt like a betrayal of the survival skills that had kept them alive. The system designed to protect children had failed them repeatedly, teaching them that safety was temporary and that trusting adults led to disappointment and abandonment. "Your mother raised a remarkable daughter," Marcus said quietly, and he watched as Elena's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Tears began to flow down her cheeks, silent testimony to grief and responsibility that no 12-year-old should carry alone. "I don't know what I'm doing," she whispered, her voice breaking for the first time since they had appeared at his fence. "I'm trying so hard to keep us safe, but I'm scared all the time. I'm scared I'm going to make the wrong choice, and something terrible will happen to Tommy." Marcus moved slowly to sit in the chair near the beds, giving Elena space while offering his presence as support. "You're doing everything right," he assured her. "You're protecting your brother and keeping your promise to your mother. That takes more courage and strength than most adults possess." Tommy had fallen asleep during their conversation, his small face peaceful for the first time since Marcus had seen him. Elena continued to stroke his hair, her movements automatic and protective even in her own exhaustion. "You both can stay here as long as you need," Marcus said. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow, but tonight you're safe and warm and fed. That's enough for now." Elena nodded and wiped her tears on the sleeve of her oversized sweater. For the first time since they had arrived, her shoulders relaxed slightly, as if sharing their story had lifted some of the weight she had been carrying alone. The morning brought no relief from the storm that had settled over the neighborhood, like a white blanket of silence. Marcus stood at his kitchen window, watching the snow continue to fall while Elena and Tommy sat at his table, sharing bowls of oatmeal with Lily, who peppered them with endless questions about their adventures and seemed completely unbothered by their unconventional arrival. The phone rang at 8:30, jarring Marcus from his thoughts about how to navigate the impossible situation Patricia Grimsby had created. The caller identification showed City Hall, and Marcus felt his stomach drop as he answered with cautious optimism that quickly dissolved into dread. "Mr. Chun, this is Sandra Williams from Code Enforcement." The woman's voice was professional but not unkind. "We've received a complaint about unlicensed food service operations at your residence. I need to schedule an inspection for tomorrow morning at 9. Marcus closed his eyes and leaned against the kitchen counter, acutely aware of Elena's sharp attention from across the room despite her apparent focus on her breakfast. "Tomorrow morning," he repeated, buying time to think while his mind raced through possible responses. "Yes," Ms. Williams continued. "The complaint alleges multiple violations of residential zoning laws, health code infractions, and operating without proper permits. I'll need to see your kitchen facilities and any documentation you have regarding food storage, preparation, and distribution." After ending the call, Marcus turned to find Elena watching him with the same intense focus she had displayed when evaluating whether to trust him with their safety. She understood enough about adult conversations and official consequences to recognize the threat this phone call represented. "They're coming to inspect tomorrow," Marcus said quietly, not wanting to alarm the children, but knowing Elena was too perceptive to be fooled by false reassurances. "Because of us," Elena stated rather than asked, her voice flat with the resignation of someone accustomed to being the cause of other people's problems. "No," Marcus said firmly. "Because Mrs. Grimsby has been looking for an excuse to shut down my soup kitchen for months. You and Tommy have nothing to do with her complaints." But Elena's expression remained skeptical, and Marcus could see her mentally preparing for another departure, another night of sleeping in dangerous conditions rather than bringing trouble to someone who had shown them kindness. The second phone call came an hour later, this time from the health department, scheduling their own inspection for Friday afternoon. Marcus wrote down the details with hands that trembled slightly, understanding that two separate government agencies investigating his home meant Patricia Grimsby had been thorough in her campaign to end his food distribution efforts. Elena appeared beside him as he hung up the phone, her small face set with determination that reminded him of soldiers preparing for battle. "We'll leave before they come," she said quietly. "Tommy and I are used to being on our own, and we won't let them use us against you." The matter-of-fact way she delivered this statement broke Marcus's heart because he recognized the painful logic behind her decision. These children had learned that their presence often made situations worse for the adults who tried to help them, and Elena had developed the survival instinct to remove herself and her brother before their need for safety could destroy someone else's stability. "You're not going anywhere," Marcus said, kneeling down to meet Elena's eyes at her level. "I've been helping people in this neighborhood long before you arrived, and I'll continue helping them regardless of what Mrs. Grimsby or the city inspectors think about my kitchen. But the inspections, Elena began, her voice carrying the weight of experience with official investigations and their consequences, will happen whether you're here or not. Marcus finished. And Tommy needs medical attention that he's not going to get if you're sleeping outside in this weather. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Tommy appeared in the doorway looking pale and slightly feverish despite the warmth of the house. Elena immediately went to him, pressing her hand against his forehead with practiced concern. Marcus watched the interaction and made a decision that felt both terrifying and completely necessary. He would face whatever consequences came from the inspections, pay whatever fines or penalties the city imposed, and find another way to help his neighbors if necessary. But he would not allow these children to return to the streets while Tommy was clearly developing symptoms that could become dangerous without proper care. The phone rang a third time, and Marcus answered with weary resignation, expecting another government agency or perhaps Patricia Grimsby herself calling to deliver additional threats. Instead, Mr. Whitmore's gentle voice came through the receiver. "Marcus, I've been making some calls this morning," the elderly man said. "I think you should know that Mrs. Grimsby has been contacting other neighbors trying to build support for her campaign against your soup kitchen. She scheduled a neighborhood association meeting for tonight to discuss what she calls the deteriorating character of our community." Marcus felt the walls closing in around him as he realized Patricia Grimsby was not content with government inspections, but was also mobilizing social pressure to isolate him from whatever community support he might have maintained. The afternoon light filtered weakly through the snow-covered windows as Marcus sat with Elena at his small dining table, helping her work through math problems from a textbook he had retrieved from his storage closet. Her quick grasp of complex concepts amazed him, and he watched as she solved equations that would challenge high school students despite having missed weeks of formal schooling. "Elena, this is remarkable work," Marcus said, reviewing her calculations. "You're working at least 2 grade levels above where most 12-year-olds perform." She shrugged with the casual dismissal of someone unaccustomed to praise for her abilities. "My mother was a teacher before she got sick," Elena explained. "She taught me and Tommy at home when the schools weren't working out. She said education was the one thing nobody could ever take away from us." The reverence in Elena's voice when she spoke of her mother told Marcus everything he needed to know about the woman who had raised these extraordinary children. Despite illness and poverty, she had continued nurturing their minds and spirits, preparing them for futures she might not live to see. Tommy sat nearby, sketching in a notebook Marcus had given him while battling the low fever that had persisted since morning. His drawings showed remarkable detail and creativity for an 80-year-old, depicting fantastical creatures and elaborate landscapes that seemed to transport him away from their current circumstances. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Marcus asked Elena as she moved on to more advanced problems. "A lawyer," she answered without hesitation. "Or maybe a judge. I want to help kids like us who get stuck in systems that don't work right. I want to make sure families don't get separated just because they're poor or because parents get sick." Marcus felt something profound shift in his chest as he listened to this young girl articulate dreams that grew directly from her pain and experiences. Elena possessed not just intelligence, but the rare combination of empathy and determination that could genuinely change the world if given proper opportunities. The sound of voices outside drew their attention to the window, where neighbors had begun gathering for Patricia Grimsby's emergency association meeting. Marcus could see people clustering in small groups on the sidewalk, their conversations animated by whatever arguments Mrs. Grimsby had been making during her door-to-door campaign. Elena watched the growing crowd with the analytical focus Marcus had come to recognize as her way of assessing potential threats. "Are they all here to talk about shutting down your soup kitchen?" she asked quietly. "Some of them," Marcus admitted, "but not all neighbors think the same way Mrs. Grimsby does. Some of the people out there have eaten at my table when they needed help." As if to prove his point, Mrs. Rodriguez appeared at the front door with her young daughter, both of them carrying covered dishes that steamed in the cold air. Marcus opened the door to find the woman he had served soup to countless times, now offering food in return. "I heard about the meeting tonight," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her eyes flashing with barely contained anger. "I brought dinner for you and the children, and I want you to know that not everyone in this neighborhood has forgotten what kindness looks like." She entered without waiting for invitation and set her dishes on the kitchen counter, then knelt down to Tommy's eye level and examined his flushed cheeks with the practiced concern of a mother who had nursed sick children through many fevers. "This little one needs medicine," she said to Marcus. "I have children's fever reducer at home, and my sister is a nurse. She could look at him if you want." Elena tensed at the mention of involving another adult in Tommy's care, but Mrs. Rodriguez seemed to understand her protective instincts and addressed her directly rather than speaking about her as if she weren't present. "My sister Maria helped me when my daughter had pneumonia last winter," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently to Elena. "She's very kind, and she won't ask questions you don't want to answer. But fevers in children can be dangerous if they get too high." The offer hung in the air while Elena weighed risks and benefits with the careful calculation of someone whose decisions carried life-or-death consequences. Tommy leaned against her shoulder, his small body radiating heat that even Marcus could feel from across the room. "Okay," Elena said finally, "but just to look at him, and we stay together." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled and pulled out her phone to call her sister, while outside the voices of the neighborhood meeting grew louder and more contentious. Marcus realized that his small kitchen had become the center of two very different conversations about community responsibility and human decency. Through the window, he could see Mr. Whitmore standing apart from the main group, occasionally glancing toward Marcus's house with an expression that mixed concern with determination. The elderly man had been a quiet supporter of the soup kitchen from its beginning, often appearing with extra groceries or anonymous donations left on the doorstep. Elena moved closer to the window and observed the crowd with the intensity of a general studying enemy troop movements. "Some of them look angry," she said quietly, "but some of them look like they're arguing with the angry ones." Marcus joined her at the window and realized she was right. The neighborhood seemed divided, with distinct groups forming around different opinions about his food distribution efforts. Patricia Grimsby stood at the center of the largest group, gesturing emphatically toward his house, but several smaller clusters had formed where people appeared to be having very different discussions about community values and helping neighbors in need. Maria Rodriguez arrived within an hour, carrying a medical bag and radiating the calm competence that comes from years of nursing experience. She examined Tommy with gentle efficiency while Elena hovered nearby, ready to intervene if anything felt threatening or wrong. "His fever is concerning but not critical," Maria explained to Elena rather than to Marcus, recognizing who held the real authority over Tommy's care. "He needs rest, fluids, and medication to bring down the temperature. I think he's fighting off an infection, probably from sleeping in cold, damp conditions." Elena nodded solemnly, accepting the diagnosis and the implied criticism of their recent living situation without defensiveness. She understood that Tommy's health had suffered from their weeks on the streets, and guilt flickered across her face before she pushed it away to focus on what needed to happen next. "Can you help him get better?" Elena asked quietly. "With proper care and warmth?" "Yes," Maria assured her. "But he shouldn't be moved or exposed to cold weather for at least a week, maybe longer depending on how he responds to treatment." The timeline hit Elena like a physical blow because she understood its implications perfectly. Tommy needed to stay somewhere safe and warm for a week or more, but Marcus faced government inspections and community pressure that could eliminate his ability to provide that safety. Outside, the neighborhood meeting had grown more heated, with voices carrying through the winter air as different factions argued about property values, community responsibility, and the kind of neighborhood they wanted to maintain. Patricia Grimsby's sharp tones rose above the others, painting Marcus's soup kitchen as a threat to everything decent residents had worked to build. Marcus made a decision that surprised him with its clarity and conviction. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number for Jennifer Walsh, a social worker he had known during his former career and trusted to prioritize children's welfare over bureaucratic convenience. "Jennifer, this is Marcus Chun," he said when she answered. "I have a situation that needs your expertise, and I need someone who will put kids first." He explained Elena and Tommy's circumstances while both children listened with the tense attention of people whose fates were being decided by adult conversations. Elena's hand found Tommy's and held it tightly as Marcus described their history in foster care and their current need for stability. "I can be there tomorrow morning," Jennifer said after hearing the full story. "I know some families who specialize in sibling groups and emergency placements. These children deserve better than what they've been getting." When Marcus ended the call, Elena's face had gone very pale, but her voice remained steady when she spoke. "You're calling social services because we're too much trouble," she said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact she had been expecting. "No," Marcus said firmly, kneeling down to meet her eyes. "I'm calling Jennifer because Tommy needs medical care, and you both deserve a real home with people who can give you everything you need. Not because you're trouble, but because you're worth fighting for." Elena studied his face with the intense scrutiny she applied to all adult promises, searching for deception or hidden motives that experience had taught her to expect. But Maria Rodriguez spoke up from where she was packing her medical supplies. "Mr. Chun has been helping families in this neighborhood for 2 years," Maria said quietly to Elena. "He's never called social services on anyone before, even when it might have been easier for him. He's calling now because he wants you to have a future, not because he wants you to leave." Tommy stirred on the couch where Maria had settled him with blankets and fever medication, his eyes still glazed with illness, but tracking the conversation with the awareness of a child who had learned that adult decisions about his life rarely took his preferences into account. "Will they separate us?" Tommy asked, his voice small and frightened. "Jennifer specializes in keeping siblings together," Marcus assured him. "She knows your history, and she understands how important it is that you and Elena stay with each other." Elena remained silent for a long moment, weighing options and calculating risks with the burden of responsibility that had shaped her entire childhood. Finally, she looked at Marcus with an expression that held both gratitude and a wisdom far beyond her 12 years. "If we have to go," Elena said slowly, "I want you to know that these 3 days with your family are the safest Tommy and I have felt since our mother died. You gave us more than soup. You gave us hope that there are still good people in the world." The simple statement carried such profound grace that Marcus felt tears well up in his eyes. These children had given him far more than he had given them, restoring his faith in the power of human connection and the importance of fighting for what was right even when the odds seemed impossible. Through the window, the neighborhood meeting continued with Patricia Grimsby's voice growing more strident as opposition to her position became apparent. But inside Marcus's warm kitchen, a different kind of community had formed around 2 children who deserved every chance at happiness and success that life could offer. 20 years had passed like pages turning in a book Marcus thought he had finished writing. The same kitchen where he had once served soup to Elena and Tommy now felt smaller, older, with paint peeling from the walls and appliances that had long since passed their prime. But the large pot still simmered every Tuesday and Friday evening, filled with the same hope and determination that had driven him to help neighbors 2 decades ago. Lily, now 28 and working as a teacher across town, sat at the familiar dining table grading papers while her father prepared for the evening's food distribution. Her dark hair was shorter now, pulled back in the practical style of someone who spent her days with energetic children, but her eyes held the same warmth that had welcomed 2 frightened orphans on that snowy night long ago. "Dad, you know you can't keep this up forever," Lily said without looking up from her students' assignments. "The neighborhood has changed. Your back isn't what it used to be, and Mrs. Patterson told me you've been having trouble with the rent again." Marcus stirred the soup with movements that had become automatic over the years, though his shoulders did ache more now and his hair had gone completely gray at the temples. The neighborhood had indeed changed, with many of the original families moving away and new residents who seemed less interested in community connections and mutual support. "People still need food, Lily," he replied gently. "As long as I can stand and stir a pot, there will be soup for anyone who's hungry." The conversation was an old one, repeated with variations every few months as Lily worried about her father's health and finances, while Marcus remained committed to the work that had defined the past 2 decades of his life. The soup kitchen had survived Patricia Grimsby's campaign, multiple city inspections, and countless challenges, but it had never thrived in the way Marcus had once hoped. The knock at the front door came earlier than usual, before the regular evening crowd had begun to gather. Marcus wiped his hands on his apron and walked toward the sound, expecting to find Mr. Whitmore or one of the other longtime neighbors who still relied on his twice-weekly meals. Instead, a woman in an elegant gray coat stood on his doorstep, her dark hair styled professionally and her posture carrying the confidence that comes with success and authority. She appeared to be in her early 30s, well-dressed but not ostentatious, with eyes that seemed familiar though Marcus couldn't place where he might have seen her before. "Mr. Chun," the woman said, and her voice carried a slight tremor that suggested nervousness beneath her composed exterior. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if I could speak with you for a few minutes." "Of course," Marcus replied, stepping aside to invite her in, though he noticed she hesitated at the threshold, looking around the modest interior with an expression that might have been recognition or perhaps disappointment at how little had changed over the years. The woman entered slowly, her expensive shoes clicking softly against the worn linoleum floor as she took in the details of the kitchen, where the soup pot still bubbled and the same mismatched bowls waited on the counter. Lily looked up from her papers with polite curiosity, and Marcus made introductions, though he still couldn't shake the feeling that he should know their visitor. "This is my daughter Lily," Marcus said. "Lily, this is—" "I'm sorry, I didn't catch her name." "Elena," the woman said quietly, and Marcus felt the world shift beneath his feet as recognition crashed over him like a wave. "Elena Volkov, though I go by Sterling now. You knew me a long time ago when I was 12 years old and sleeping in your backyard during a snowstorm." The wooden spoon Marcus had been holding clattered to the floor as he stared at the poised, successful woman standing in his kitchen. She bore little resemblance to the frightened, protective girl who had guarded her sick brother with fierce determination, but her eyes held the same intelligence and strength that had impressed him all those years ago. "Elena," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion and disbelief. "My God, you're here. You're really here." Lily's head snapped up from her papers as she realized who was standing in their kitchen, and her face broke into a smile of wonder and delight. The little girl who had shared her toys and chattered about books with Tommy, now grown into a woman who had clearly achieved the dreams Elena had spoken about during those 3 precious days of safety. "I promised I would never forget your kindness," Elena said, her own voice becoming less steady as emotion threatened to break through her professional composure. "It took me longer than I hoped to find you again, but I never stopped looking. I never stopped remembering the man who gave 2 scared children hope when the rest of the world had given up on them." Marcus moved toward her with the same careful, non-threatening approach he had used 20 years ago when she had stood frozen by his fence. But now she met him halfway and allowed herself to be enveloped in the embrace of the man who had changed the trajectory of her entire life with nothing more than warm soup and unconditional kindness. Elena's embrace felt like holding a ghost made flesh, and Marcus found himself trembling as 20 years of wondering and hoping collapsed into the reality of her presence in his kitchen. She had grown into exactly the kind of woman he had imagined during those long nights when he wondered if his small act of kindness had made any lasting difference in the world. When they finally separated, Elena wiped tears from her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so reminiscent of the frightened 12-year-old girl that Marcus felt his heart constrict with memory and joy. "Tommy," Marcus asked quietly, hardly daring to hope for news of the sick little boy who had stolen his heart with quiet drawings and fever-bright eyes. Elena's smile transformed her entire face, erasing the years of professional composure to reveal pure happiness. He's a doctor now, she said with pride that rang through every word. Dr. Thomas Volkov, pediatric oncologist at Children's Hospital in Seattle. He specializes in treating kids who are fighting the same kind of cancer that took our mother. The beautiful symmetry of Tommy's career choice sent waves of emotion through Marcus that he struggled to contain. The vulnerable child who had needed protection and medicine had grown up to become the protector and healer for other children facing similar battles. He wanted to be here today, Elena continued, but he's in surgery with a 6-year-old patient whose family reminds him of us. He made me promise to tell you that not a day goes by that he doesn't think about the man who showed him what real strength looks like. Lily had abandoned her papers entirely and moved closer to listen to Elena's story, her teacher's heart recognizing the profound impact of witnessing a former student's transformation into everything they had dreamed of becoming. "What about you, Elena?" Lily asked with genuine curiosity. "What did you become after you left us that night?" Elena's laugh held notes of both triumph and irony. "I kept my promise to become a lawyer," she said. "But along the way, I also became a businesswoman. I own Sterling Properties, a real estate development company that specializes in affordable housing and community centers. Everything I do is designed to make sure families don't end up on the streets the way Tommy and I did." Marcus felt pride swell in his chest as he listened to Elena describe a life built around the same values that had driven him to open his home and kitchen to strangers. She had taken the kindness he had shown her and multiplied it into an empire of compassion that touched hundreds of lives. But Elena's expression grew more serious as she looked around the kitchen that had remained largely unchanged from that night 20 years ago. The same worn counters, the same mismatched bowls, the same large pot that had provided warmth and sustenance to anyone who needed it. "Mr. Chun," she said, her voice taking on the professional tone of someone accustomed to conducting important business, "I drove by your house 3 times before I found the courage to knock on your door. Each time, I noticed things that worried me." She gestured toward the window where evening light revealed peeling paint on the exterior walls and a roof that had clearly seen better days. "The mailbox by your front door is overflowing with what look like bills and official notices," she continued. "The walkway needs repair, and your car in the driveway appears to be held together with hope and prayer." Marcus felt embarrassment flush his cheeks as Elena cataloged the visible signs of his financial struggles. The soup kitchen had always operated on the thinnest of margins, funded by his modest savings and whatever part-time work he could find between serving meals to his neighbors. "Elena, you don't need to worry about," Marcus began, but she held up a hand with the authority of someone who had learned to take charge of difficult conversations. 20 years ago, you gave me and Tommy shelter when we had nowhere else to go," Elena said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You fed us when we were hungry, you kept us warm when we were cold, and you gave us hope when we had forgotten such a thing existed. Most importantly, you showed us that we were worth saving." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope that had clearly been prepared with careful consideration. Her hands shook slightly as she held it, and Marcus realized that whatever was inside represented far more than a simple gesture of gratitude. "I've spent the last 5 years trying to find you," Elena continued. "Not because I felt obligated to repay a debt, but because I needed you to know that the 3 days we spent in your home changed everything for us. You didn't just give us soup, Mr. Chun. You gave us our futures." The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle bubbling of the soup pot and the sound of Marcus's own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Elena extended the envelope toward him with both hands, as if offering something sacred that required proper reverence and care. "This contains the deed to your house," Elena said quietly. "As of this morning, your mortgage is completely paid off. But that's just the beginning of what I want to do to thank you for saving 2 children who had lost faith in the possibility that adults could be trusted to help instead of hurt." Marcus stared at the envelope in Elena's hands as if it contained something that might explode if handled incorrectly. The idea that this successful woman wanted to pay off his mortgage felt surreal, like a dream that would dissolve if he moved too quickly or spoke too loudly. "Elena, I can't accept something like that," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What you and Tommy have accomplished with your lives is payment enough for whatever help I was able to give you." But Elena's expression held the same determined stubbornness he remembered from that 12-year-old girl who had refused to be separated from her brother despite impossible circumstances. She set the envelope on the kitchen counter with deliberate finality and began speaking with the controlled passion of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times. "Mr. Chun, do you remember what I told you I wanted to be when I grew up?" Elena asked, though she clearly didn't expect an answer. "You said it was remarkable work when I solved those math problems at this very table. You told me I was smart enough to become anything I wanted to be." Marcus nodded, remembering the girl's quick grasp of complex concepts and her articulated dreams of becoming a lawyer to help other children in foster care. "No adult had ever told me I was smart before you did," Elena continued, her voice growing thick with emotion she had been holding back. "Foster families told me I was trouble. Social workers told me I was difficult. Teachers told me I was behind because of all the schools I had missed. But you looked at a scared, dirty girl who had been sleeping outside and saw someone worth investing in." Lily moved closer to her father, her own eyes filling with tears as she listened to Elena describe the profound impact of words Marcus had offered casually, without understanding their transformative power. "After Jennifer Walsh placed us with the Morrison family," Elena went on, "I threw myself into school with a determination that surprised everyone, including myself. I earned a full scholarship to Columbia University, graduated summa cum laude from law school, and spent 3 years working for a nonprofit that provides legal services to families in crisis." Marcus felt overwhelming pride in Elena's achievements, but also a growing sense that her success had come at a cost he couldn't fully understand. There was something in her posture that suggested years of working harder than anyone should have to work, driven by demons that success had quieted but never fully silenced. "But law wasn't enough," Elena said with a rueful smile. "I kept seeing families lose their homes because of medical bills or job losses, or simply because affordable housing didn't exist in their communities. So I used my legal knowledge to get into real estate development, focusing on projects that keep families housed instead of displacing them." She gestured toward the envelope again, but this time her movement carried the confidence of someone who had learned to make decisions that others might consider impossible. "Sterling Properties has developed over 2,000 units of affordable housing in the past 10 years, Elena said with quiet pride. "We've prevented hundreds of families from experiencing homelessness, and we've partnered with organizations that provide the same kind of support you've been giving this neighborhood for 20 years. Marcus began to understand that Elena's success wasn't just personal achievement, but a direct extension of the values she had absorbed during those 3 days in his kitchen. She had taken his example of helping others and built it into an enterprise that touched lives across multiple communities. "The mortgage on your house represents about 2 hours of profit for my company," Elena continued with a smile that held both affection and gentle insistence. "But the inspiration you gave me to build that company is worth more than I could ever repay in a dozen lifetimes." She moved to the kitchen window and looked out at the neighborhood, where people were beginning to gather for the evening meal distribution, just as they had 20 years ago when she and Tommy first appeared at Marcus's fence. "There's more," Elena said, turning back to face Marcus and Lily with an expression that mixed excitement with nervous anticipation. "I've purchased the 3 vacant lots on this block, and I want to build a community center that will house a proper kitchen for your food distribution program, meeting spaces for neighborhood organizations, and a clinic where people can receive basic medical care." The scope of her vision took Marcus's breath away as he realized Elena wasn't just offering to solve his immediate financial problems, but was proposing to transform his small act of individual kindness into something that could serve the entire community for generations to come. "I want to call it the Chun Community Center," Elena said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of 20 years of gratitude and planning. "And I want you to be its first director, with a salary that will let you focus entirely on helping people instead of worrying about paying rent." The silence in the kitchen stretched like a held breath as Marcus processed the magnitude of Elena's proposal. A community center bearing his name felt impossible to accept, as foreign to his self-image as the idea that his simple act of sharing soup could have rippled outward into the kind of success Elena had achieved. Lily broke the silence first, her voice filled with wonder and tears. "Elena, this is incredible," she said, moving to embrace the woman who had once been the frightened girl sharing their dinner table. "But you don't owe us anything this enormous. What Dad did, he did because it was right, not because he expected anything in return." Elena returned Lily's embrace while keeping her eyes fixed on Marcus, who stood frozen by the complexity of emotions washing over him. Gratitude, disbelief, and overwhelming humility warred in his chest as he tried to comprehend that the scared children he had sheltered for 3 days had grown into adults whose success could transform his entire neighborhood. "That's exactly why this matters so much," Elena said gently. "Your father helped us when helping us cost him everything. Mrs. Grimsby's campaign nearly destroyed his soup kitchen. The city inspections could have resulted in fines he couldn't afford, and taking us and put him at legal risk that could have separated him from you, Lily." Marcus remembered those dark days when it seemed like his efforts to help others might cost him everything he valued most, including his ability to provide for his own daughter. The fear that had kept him awake at night, calculating whether his commitment to feeding hungry neighbors was worth the risk of losing his home and custody of Lily. But he never wavered. Elena continued, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "Even when it would have been easier and safer to turn us away, even when helping us made his own situation more dangerous, he chose to do what was right instead of what was convenient." She pulled out her phone and showed them photographs of gleaming buildings with families moving into new apartments, children playing in community gardens, and elderly residents gathering in bright common areas that radiated warmth and belonging. "Every family that moves into one of our developments gets the same message Tommy and I received in this kitchen," Elena explained as she scrolled through the images. "They matter, they deserve safety and dignity, and someone believes in their potential to build better lives." Marcus studied the photographs and saw his own values reflected in Elena's architectural choices. Wide porches that encouraged neighbor interactions, community spaces designed for gathering and mutual support, playgrounds positioned where parents could supervise while visiting with each other. The Chun Community Center would anchor a neighborhood transformation that goes far beyond food distribution, Elena said, her eyes shining with excitement as she described her vision. Medical clinics staffed by volunteer doctors like Tommy, legal aid services for families facing eviction or immigration challenges, after-school programs for children whose parents work multiple jobs. She gestured toward the window where neighbors continued gathering for their evening meal, people whose lives had been touched by Marcus's quiet consistency over 2 decades of service. But most importantly, Elena continued, it would provide a permanent home for the soup kitchen that saved our lives. No more worrying about health department complaints or zoning violations. No more using your personal kitchen and wearing out your own appliances. A proper facility where volunteers can help serve hundreds of meals instead of dozens. Marcus felt tears building behind his eyes as he imagined the scope of what Elena was proposing. His small act of individual kindness, born from his own heartbreak and desire to help others, transformed into an institution that could serve his community for generations. The phone in Elena's hand buzzed with an incoming call as she glanced at the screen with a smile that lit up her entire face. "It's Tommy," she said, her voice soft with affection. "He's calling between surgeries to find out how our reunion went." She answered the call and put it on speaker, and suddenly the kitchen filled with the voice of the sick little boy Marcus remembered, now grown into a man whose warmth and intelligence came through clearly despite the distance. "Mr. Chun," Tommy's voice said, and Marcus could hear both tears and laughter in those 2 words. "Elena told me she was going to find you today, and I've been thinking about you all morning between patients. I need you to know that the doctor I became exists because you showed me what healing looks like when it comes from love instead of obligation." Marcus gripped the edge of the kitchen counter as emotion threatened to overwhelm him completely. The realization that his simple decision to help two hungry children had shaped them into adults who dedicated their lives to helping others felt like discovering that a single match had started a forest fire of compassion. Elena is going to take care of the practical details, Tommy continued through the phone speaker, but I want you to understand the real gift we're offering. You gave us proof that good people exist in the world, and now I want to help you prove the same thing to every family that walks through the doors of the Chun Community Center. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the gleaming kitchen of the Chun Community Center, watching volunteers prepare meals for twice as many families as his old backdoor operation had ever served. The industrial stove and professional-grade equipment still felt foreign to him, but the warmth radiating from the volunteers and the laughter of children playing in the adjacent community room created the same atmosphere of hope and belonging that had defined his modest kitchen. Elena had insisted on keeping the original soup pot for Marcus's house, and it now held a place of honor in the center's display case alongside photographs documenting the transformation from a single man's simple desire to help his neighbors into a thriving hub of community support and mutual aid. Dr. Thomas Volkov had flown in from Seattle for the center's opening ceremony, and Marcus had finally met the grown man who had once been the fever-bright little boy drawing fantastical creatures at his dining table. Tommy's gentle bedside manner with the children visiting the medical clinic revealed the same protective instincts that had made Elena so fierce in defending him, now channeled in a healing rather than survival. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors, including several surprise guests who had traveled from other cities to witness the realization of Elena's vision. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived with her daughter, now a college sophomore studying social work, both of them beaming with pride at seeing Marcus finally receive the recognition his decades of service had earned. Even Mr. Whitmore, now 86 and moving more slowly but still sharp as ever, had come to cut the ribbon alongside Marcus, Elena, and Tommy. The elderly man's quiet support over the years had never wavered, and his presence at the ceremony felt like a blessing from the neighborhood itself. But the most meaningful moment came when a young woman approached Marcus during the reception, her two small children clinging to her hands and staring with wide eyes at the bustling activity surrounding them. She introduced herself as Carmen Silva, a single mother who had been sleeping in her car with her kids until the center's emergency housing program had connected her with temporary shelter and job training opportunities. "Mr. Chun," Carmen said, her voice thick with the same gratitude Marcus had heard in Elena's voice 20 years earlier. "My children have a safe place to sleep tonight because of what you built here. I don't know how to thank you for giving us hope when we thought there was none left." Marcus knelt down to meet the children at their eye level, seeing in their faces the same mixture of wariness and desperate need that had defined Elena and Tommy during that long-ago snowstorm. But these children would have access to resources and support systems that could prevent them from ever experiencing the kind of prolonged uncertainty and fear that had shaped Elena's childhood. "You don't need to thank me," Marcus told Carmen gently. "Just remember that kindness is contagious, and someday, when you're able to help someone else, you'll pass it forward to another family who needs it." As the evening wound down and the last visitors departed, Marcus found himself alone in the kitchen with Elena, both of them standing beside the old soup pot that had started everything. The space around them hummed with the potential energy of an organization designed to serve the community for decades to come. "I keep thinking about that night 20 years ago," Elena said quietly, her successful exterior giving way to the vulnerable young woman who still lived beneath years of achievement and responsibility. "If you had turned us away, if you had decided that helping us was too risky or too much trouble, Tommy might not have survived that winter." Marcus shook his head, remembering the impossible choice that hadn't felt like a choice at all when confronted with two children who needed warmth and safety. "I couldn't have turned you away," he said simply. "Looking at you and Tommy was like looking at Lily if something had happened to me. Every child deserves an adult who will fight for them." Elena smiled through tears that sparkled in the bright lights of the new kitchen. "That's exactly what I mean," she said. "You didn't just save two children that night. Mr. Chun. You saved everyone those children would grow up to help, and everyone those people would help in turn. You started something that will keep growing long after all of us are gone. Through the center's large windows, Marcus could see families walking past on the sidewalk, some heading home from work, others perhaps looking for the kind of help and hope that Elena had found at his back fence 2 decades ago. Tomorrow, the center would open its doors to anyone who needed food, medical care, legal assistance, or simply a safe place to rest and remember that they matter to someone. The Chun Community Center represented more than Elena's gratitude or Marcus's legacy. It stood as proof that small acts of kindness, offered without expectation of return, could ripple outward through time and space to transform entire communities. Every meal served, every family housed, every child given hope would carry forward the simple message that Marcus had offered to 2 frightened orphans. You are worth saving, you deserve dignity, and there are people in this world who will fight to help you build a better life. If this story touched your heart, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite part, character, or if you've ever witnessed someone's hidden potential shine when given the chance to succeed.